Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's class. We have visiting artist Jeremy Okai Davis with us. He is a painter from Portland, Oregon, and he is one of my favorite painters from that area. Whenever he would have a show, I would always be so excited about it and wanting to see his work. He has a great personality too. When you're walking around art shows, I always enjoyed, kind of running into him and talking about what he was working on. And so when I was thinking about artists that I wanted to have meet up with you guys, I thought that he really does interesting things with the figure. And so, when you guys are thinking about what you're working on with your final projects, about, having a consistent theme, kind of choosing a subject to work on, that's what he does as an artist too. He'll kind of come up with an idea that is something that he's kind of thinking a lot about, and then kind of go in and kind of develop that, research that, and then come up with something that is pretty unique and interesting. I'm always so thrilled by everything that you do. So thank you for being you, Jeremy.
Thanks for that intro. That was really sweet.
All right.
We shared a studio. You were in Switchyard, right?
Yes,
I
forgot about that. Yeah.
We had our dogs. We both had our dogs.
Yep. So we would have little dogs that would like to kind of say hi to each other, and that was a fun space. There was so such a variety of artists in that space there. Yeah. Oh, Portland. The good old days there.
The good old days, yeah.
All right. So I'm going to go through and kind of ask you a few questions. Okay. So what types of materials, concepts, or projects do you typically work with?
Well, as you said, I'm a figure-based painter, meaning most of my work revolves around the figure. Portraits or figures, but also I like to include other elements in my work, be it like text or graphic elements, or recently I've been adding some like three-dimensional elements like found objects or wood have made their way into my work now. Each body of work is kind of different. I mean, they all revolve around acrylic-based figurative paintings, but each body kind of calls for new elements, and I try to let the project kind of speak to me and let me know how it wants to be how it wants to be done, basically. At the heart of it, I'm a figure painter using acrylics. I love acrylic paint because a lot of the times I like to layer up my paint, and if you look closely at the portraits, there's like a kind of a pixelation, kind of a buildup of color that I use, as opposed to blending, smoothing out the skin tones. I use this buildup, so the acrylic paint helps a lot with letting the paint dry, so I can just continue to work and continue to build up and build kind of a history with the pieces.
You want me to start showing some of those?
Sure. Yeah, you can show some of the pieces. I should have sent you some like detail shots so they could see like tighter looks at them, but
okay.
So this one here is a more recent piece that I did. I had a show last, what was it, September, at Stumptown Coffee, downtown Portland, and this painting was part of a series called I'm forgetting what I called it. What did I call the show? Anyways, the show was based around Shirley cards, which were these Kodak cards that they used in the 50s to develop. And a lot of the cards, a lot of the images or the people that they used were all Caucasian. So just at the heart of it, there was like this disregard for darker skin complexion. So I did this body of work that was based around basically making black Shirley cards. So this painting is called Dufay, and it was probably the closest to the actual Shirley cards, with the color blocks on the left-hand side and the gradient on the bottom. Oh, the show is called The Presence of Color. That's
The
what it was
Presence of
called.
Color.
Ah,
Okay,
Yeah.
there we go. So yeah, one thing that I love about your work too is that you kind of show the process with it as well. So you kind of have this piece here and letting the drips kind of interact with part of that too. You kind of get
Yeah.
the sense of it being made.
Yeah, totally. I like, there's a quote that I always think about from Andy Warhol. They asked him, because in his early paintings, like before he was doing the screen printing, there was a lot of drips. And a critic asked him once, like, why do you drip? Like, why all the drips? And he said, how else are they going to know it's a painting? And I just thought that was really, really funny. So I've kind of stuck with that. Like, I like letting the paint show itself, or let the painting show itself and show how it was done. And like I said before, the history of the painting, being able to see the different layers that are built up are really important to me.
Yeah, well, and the fact that you're using acrylic, what I love about your work too is it can come across as oils. It has a really richness to it, and it really has that sense, like this looks back here, this looks like a lot of different oils kind of built up. There's great quality to that.
Yeah, I mean, over the years, I've learned there's different mediums that you can buy. I use mostly golden and acrylic, or golden and Liquitex, and they both have really great mediums that you can like kind of put together, piece together, that can give the acrylic paint the look of oil, kind of that thick, textury, kind of a oily look. So I play around a lot with my acrylics to get them to not necessarily look like acrylics, but have the same capabilities that acrylics have.
Yeah, so you're strategic with that. That's great.
Yeah.
All right, so.
This piece was also in that show, The Presence of Color. And again, with the history, it's called Fix, and I was playing with the idea of using the fix, and when you're developing prints, like it gets, the print comes to life as you're looking in the developing room. So the image on the right is her like kind of developing, and then the one on the left is basically in full development, but there's still pieces missing. And I was playing with the idea of basically fixing a problem, the problem that we had with Kodak film, or with developing film, or Shirley cards, but also leaving it undone, saying that there's still work to be done. A lot of the pieces have this incomplete element to it, and that's kind of the point behind that, is showing that for me, like literally there's work that could be done on the piece, but also the topic that I'm talking about still has a ways to go.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
So those last two were probably the most recent paintings that I've finished. This painting was from, I want to say 2010. And when I first moved to Portland, I was doing paintings more like this, just kind of like they're images of friends that I've had, like that I either take off Facebook or Instagram, and I was trying to capture these moments in time. So there's a lot of paintings. I don't know how many I had sent to you, Rebecca, but this is one of those. So it's just like kind of loose, feel-good paintings, almost not a lot of story behind the actual piece, aside from me trying to figure out what I could do with paint, just kind of building up my repertoire.
Yeah. And so did you paint this with actual acrylic in here too? Is this like one solid like paper that you started with and painted on top with, or is this paint?
No, it started with the gesso, like white gessoed canvas, and it appears black, but there's a lot of other color in there. It's black, and I think there's some like Prussian blues, and just there's for me, like using just a straight black can flatten out a piece, and it looks rather flat because it's a digital version of it, but to see it in person, you would notice more of the the other colors that are kind of mixed with the blacks.
That was something that I had to fight my painting students with. They just kept wanting to use that, and it was
Solid black.
so it was nice hearing that from another artist here.
Yeah, it makes a difference. I mean, when you see the images digitally, it doesn't necessarily come across, but if you're showing in a gallery and you have this kind of deep black that incorporates other colors, it really makes the viewer have to get a little bit closer and investigate.
Awesome, great. Okay, this is a similar time period?
Yeah, similar. This is from that same kind of era of paintings. Kind of when I was at Switchyard. I think this one was started at Switchyard in about probably 2010 or so. Yeah, similar idea. And again, with the drips and just playing around with what I can do with acrylic paints.
And so do you typically start off with a kind of drawing with this, or do you typically kind of start with a paint first?
There's a lot of different ways that I approach. Like sometimes I don't remember how I started this one, but sometimes I'll sketch out what I want to do, and then either do transfer directly to canvas with like a graphite, or I'll project, or I'll just start. Or I mean, the question you're asking, I usually draw the image first. I don't go to the canvas with paint first. Okay. There's some sort of loose drawing that happens initially, always.
Yeah, that's the way that I am too. I need too much control with the work.
Yeah.
With
the acrylic paint, like I mentioned before, like it dries quickly. If I was working with oils, I think being able to sketch with the oils and wipe away and move stuff around would be a lot easier. But I've always had a better time with either using like a vine charcoal or just a pencil, just to get the image on the canvas compositionally where I want it before I start, but still pretty loose before I
do the same with mine.
Sorry, Bert, what were you saying? Bert, can you repeat your question?
Oh, I just said I do the same with when I painted that. Whenever I paint, just to give me a little bit more control.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting the image on is, I mean, everybody works differently, but for me, it's always made more sense to get the image just kind of compositionally where I want it to be before I start painting. I think you save a lot of time doing it that way.
Yeah, I can vouch for that personally, from like just trying to like start out with like acrylics and all different types of paints when I was like 12, and like I didn't start out with sketches first, and it just took me forever.
Yeah.
Right, and there's always a learning curve too with it, right? And so it's like, you know, if you're already comfortable with drawing, that kind of gives you one step ahead to kind of get that ready, and then, you know, building the painting, and you know, you can go back and forth, you know, with different styles, and I feel like each body of work will kind of decide for you what should happen too, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah,
for sure.
All right, so let's go on.
Yeah, so this painting was done in 2015, I think it was. It's called The Dance Party. It was based, I had a show at a place called Duplex Gallery in Portland, and a landlord that I had knew that I really liked like vintage imagery, like old photos, because I'm also a photographer, just a hobby photographer, not professional by any means, but I've always loved the history of photography and documenting. And so I got these photos. There's a box full of photos, and this is one of the ones that stuck out to me. The photos were all of this one group of friends that were road tripping or taking trips around the Northwest in like the late 70s, early 80s. So I wanted to do this body of work that kind of spoke to that, but also spoke to the idea of documentation of events and things that you do in your life, because things are so much different now with phones. Like you don't have this physical object that you put into a photo album or frame and put on. I guess you could still print off a digital photo, but not many people are doing that anymore. You just have it on your phone. in these pixels. So the paintings were kind of a response to that, kind of paying homage to a certain time and place. I think the show was called Those Days Are Over. And I didn't send Rebecca a photo, but there's an actual photo of, or a painting of like a box of Kodachrome film, and more images similar to this. Like some of the paintings were like, I painted one that to look kind of like a Polaroid with the thick frame at the bottom with the text in it and everything. So this painting stuck out to me because I really like the way this one came across. And I wanted to say something about this one. A lot of the times I spend like days, hours working on pieces trying to get them perfect. This was the last piece I did for that show, and I probably did this over the course of 2 days, and it just came out, I don't know, it had a looseness to it that I try to capture with my paintings, but I have a hard time doing. Like even the part on the right with I don't know if you can zoom in on these, but the woman's hair to the right is just like a wash of color. And then the shirt, I taped off and like masked off and just did this solid stripe. And I just really loved the way that like the wash played against this more sharp edge. And since this and a few pieces before, I've tried to play with that idea of the drippy kind of tactile like paint, but also this kind of masked off sharp edge, so that they kind of speak to each other, play with each other, and make it kind of punch each other up a little bit. So
yeah, so sometimes, working fast, it can surprise you because you just are kind of in the zone with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And right now we've been talking about procrastination as well, and I was saying that artists were typically would kind of wait till the last minute with things, but then we kind of dial them out, and that sometimes having a limited amount of time can kind of push you in ways that you didn't realize. And so
exactly, yeah, this piece I knew that I wanted to do. I think I ended up doing about 10 pieces for the show, and I knew that I wanted the 10, and this was the last one that I started. So, and I had maybe a week to get it done, and I was giving myself that week, but it came out so much faster because of that energy that I had in me to get it done.
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend. I don't recommend wait until the last minute to get paintings done, but it definitely has its benefits from time to time.
Yeah, we're at that stage right now where our final projects are coming up here. So here's to having them be really fantastic coming through. All right.
So I mentioned earlier about the three-dimensional elements that I was adding to the pieces. This is one of those. In I think it was 2016, I started working on these paintings that had this kind of wood element on top of the pieces. These were all done, or this one, along with the other pieces that go with it. They're all 24 by 24, and they were done on like a wood panel. And then I stretched canvas around it, so it gave me this harder substrate that I could nail wood into or add elements to it. And also the background in this one was less of the buildup and less of the oily looking paint. I cut the acrylic paint with water to make it a little bit more drippy. But if you were to see it in person, you would see a lot more of the canvas. Just like a wash of paint. And I did that first and then did the portrait to kind of see what happened with that, as opposed to this kind of long process of building up the backgrounds. And then again, I left it incomplete. This painting was in a show, so bad about remembering the names of my shows. It was called The Information and the Inspiration. And it was kind of rooted around, in 2015, like the cop killings of unarmed Black men. That was like front page news, from like first on the news story. So I wanted to do paintings that kind of responded to that, but it also responded to Trump being elected. I had this like kind of deep like emotional response to it, and I wanted to know why. So I started doing these paintings that are of mostly, well, all Black men. Actually, there's some women in the paintings as well. So this is one of those. It's called Wood. And again, I left the painting incomplete to reference the work that needs to be done, literally and figuratively.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and so some of your pieces too, I noticed you would have these.
Did I freeze?
We could hear you talking just fine, so that kind of worked. But
Okay.
yeah,
I broke out for a second there.
yeah. So some of your paintings, you're doing this thing where you have kind of this angle of it.
Oh yeah, did I send some of those?
Let's see.
I think I sent one.
Okay, so we'll talk about that when we get to that then. I'm just curious.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have to say, this one was done in 2007 maybe. So yeah, this is just an example of that same type of work that I was doing, but also showing the text that I'll include in pieces and the graphic elements. This is like kind of a hodgepodge kind of piece with like more collage-y elements along with the figures.
I realize now you might have been an inspiration for me back in the day, because I have some similar things in my pieces that I've been doing.
I was just gonna say, this reminds me of one of your art pieces with the garden hose and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. So
The Victory Gardens.
yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah, yeah.
I think I've always, to tout Rebecca, I've always been a really big fan of your work as well. So I think we have subconsciously pulled things out or are working from the same frame of mind a lot of time with our work. So
yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
that's fun. It's interesting you guys noticed too then. All right, here's one of those pieces then. Yeah.
Yeah, so this was done in 2017. I had a show called An Education in Portland, downtown Portland, and the show was about, like, basically it was the way I described it as a self-portrait, a long-form self-portrait without an actual self-portrait in it. So all the pieces are elements of my past. This one here is my dad and my big brother when he was a baby. And my dad was a coach. So riding around with my dad, like when I was a kid, when he saw people he knew, they would just call him coach. They would say, hey, coach. So I was thinking about that idea, but also the idea of being a father. I wasn't yet a father when I did this painting, but the idea of being a father is similar to being a coach and coaching your children up and showing them the right way to do things and to approach life. So that's what this painting's about. But the substrate I use, all the paintings have this kind of angled substrate, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything to the idea of an education, but with the show, I was trying to figure out a different way to engage the audience. And I saw a show in LA once, and it wasn't a portrait show, it wasn't a painting show even, it was the guy did these pieces that were like found wood, and he just like collaged them together. And every so often he would have this piece of wood that kind of jutted out into the audience, like into the viewer space. That was really interesting how, like, I was always drawn to that. So I thought it would be interesting to do paintings when you walk into the gallery, have the paintings kind of enter the viewer space as opposed to the viewer having to walk closer, like the paintings kind of address the audience. So that was the idea behind all those paintings having the angled structure. And they also have the three-dimensional elements too. The piece right below the figure and above coach is a quarter round piece of molding. So that kind of enters space in a way. And there's a few other pieces that have that same kind of build up.
Can I ask a quick question about this piece?
Sure.
Is the it's hard to tell, is the canvas itself, is it like angled? Are the dimensions smaller on one and the other, or is that just you paint that corner piece in there?
How it raises up, like how it points out in the top?
Yeah.
The actual structure is angled like that. Like the bottom, I think, is maybe 2 inches, and the top is 6 inches, I believe. If I remember
And
right.
so when you painted it, did you? Because like I can tell that the canvas itself is like sort of at an angle, but the figure looks. It doesn't look skewed, like out of proportion because of that. So did you paint it like at an angle, like looking at the canvas from an angle and painting it?
No, I have my easel. My easel like has an angle, so I can just shift it so the painting is flat as I was working on it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just interesting because it's like that I can tell it's tilted, but the character doesn't look, doesn't look like we're looking at him from an angle.
Yeah, if you were to see it in person and you're standing below it, like he would. It's the angle isn't as dramatic as maybe I intended it to be, like when I first did it. But you definitely, when you get close, the portrait is in a sense like looking down on you a little bit. So, and I hung them higher for that reason also. But yeah, the images aren't skewed, just the structure.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. I haven't seen anything like that before.
Yeah, I haven't, that's the only show that I did that in. Actually, I had a couple of those left over, so I did a few other pieces afterwards that were kind of along the same lines of these paintings. But yeah, I thought it would be interesting to have like this room that all the paintings kind of move into the center of the space versus just being flat on the wall like you're used to seeing.
Well, yeah, and
almost
so,
like a sculpture versus just a painting.
Yeah, and having them in a different location too, that it's just those subtle things, those subtle changes can really kind of make a huge difference with how the audience interacts with it as well.
For sure. Yeah.
Fantastic. I love the background too.
Yeah, that was a lot of trial and error taping. The wallpaper in the image, it was like a old like 70s wallpaper in my parents' kitchen. So I was trying to recreate that, but also have like kind of the textured kind of paint look. So just a lot of taping off, doing the same kind of paint application, ripping the tape off, taping off again. So I think there's maybe 4 different layers of paint that made that kind of pattern, the wallpaper pattern.
Great. All right, so let's see how many more. Is this the last one?
That might be the last one, yeah.
Okay, so what we'll do now is I'll stop the screen share of this and return back. And so we'll continue on with some of our questions. Okay, so did you take any classes that were a major influence for you? Were there specific teachers that really stood out?
Yeah, it's been a while since I was in college, but I remember I had 2 project classes, which were basically like kind of free-for-all classes where we start the semester and we have like a few weeks to basically think of a body of work. And it sounds similar to what you're doing with them, having to make a body of work. And those were my favorite classes. Like I before that, you do individual projects and try to basically execute a theme or tell a story with one piece. But the projects classes taught me to kind of draw out the story. You can draw out the story with like 5 or 6 pieces or 10 pieces. So I really enjoyed those because it was like a semester-long investigation into a body of work. So those 2 classes that I had, 2 project classes my senior year. And then my figure drawing classes, my figure drawing classes, I think my sophomore year, I really enjoyed. I had a very strict professor, but he was strict, but he knew, like I knew that, I feel like at the time I didn't enjoy it, but in hindsight, he was very strict about getting the figure correct and knowing anatomy and proportions. And I think once I figured it out and once I showed him that I'd figured it out, he was a lot looser with like experimentation, playing around with the images. And I think that taught me to have kind of a rock solid foundation on craft. And that just really pushes the story you're trying to tell. Like if the figure is off a little bit, or the portrait is off, not even a little bit, like if the portrait is off, that might be all the viewer sees, and they may not want to look any deeper into the piece or know more about the piece if they see this arm that's like kind of crazy looking. So
Or not
making sure that you're what's that? Yeah, making sure that your the craft is there, I think, is really important. So that teacher kind of taught me that. Yeah, and that's been really good for my development. I've thought back to him. Dean Buckowitz was his name, and I've thought about him a lot over the years.
Awesome, great. Okay, so what are you currently working on?
Well, there's a new courthouse being built in downtown Portland, and they had a call for artists. So me and I think 10 other artists are working on pieces for the courthouse. So I'm not sure how to, I don't know, I think I can turn my screen around. It's really large. It's 9 foot by 10 foot.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really fit in my studio. So I had to do it in 4 pieces.
Wow.
So basically, this portion at the bottom with the diploma is one. That's one. The kids on the swings are one, and then this bottom portion. So that's what I'm working on right now, trying to finish that up. I have about 2 weeks to get it finished, and it's basically there. There's some tightening up that I need to do. And I guess I can show like a close-up of like kind of the buildup of the paint that I talk about with, as opposed to blending, I do these like kind of splotches of color.
Wow.
So working on that. I have a group show at a gallery called Stephanie Sheffa's Project. So this is the piece that I'm starting for that. By the end of it, so he's basically finished. Like I said, I'm going to leave all the stuff kind of incomplete there and the drips that I really like. But the plan is to, this is like a Photoshop version of my plan. So the plan is to do this kind of like chevron over the bottom portion of them. So working on that. And yeah, those are basically the only 2. This is a small piece that, I don't know if you can see it very well. This is a small piece that I just did last night. Not for any shows, but every so often I just get bored and I want to try things out. So playing with the color bar, the Shirley card idea with the color bar. So it's the CMYK is the colors that you use for print. So basically it's the CMYK, but I added this brown to each of them. Kind of playing with that idea a little bit. So yeah, that's what I'm working on now. And let's switch this back around. Yeah, so let's see. There we go.
Great.
Yeah, that's what's going on.
Thank you for sharing that. That was great to kind of see the behind the scenes there too.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I was gonna do this from my house, but I was like, oh, it makes sense to drive to my studio.
A little sneak peek.
A little sneak peek, yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be fantastic installed in the courthouse.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's the largest piece I've done, the 9 foot by 10 foot. So that was kind of a challenge. Just like I said, with my studio, it's not that large. So I had to figure out a solution, and that was breaking it into the 4 different pieces. But I think it'll look good once it's all pieced together.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so what was the thing that really influenced you the most while you were building your career?
Other artists, I would say. I don't keep up with it as much as I did when I was a younger artist, but I had a Tumblr page, like a blog, that I used as kind of an archive of artists that influenced me. So I would search the internet like endlessly, like at work mostly. I have a day job as well, so I'm in front of a computer a lot of the time. So when we're slow, or even when we're not slow, sometimes I'll just get online and just look up what shows are happening over the world. And I go to, Rebecca knows the Fresh Pot coffee shop on Hawthorne. I lived not too far from there, so I would go to that coffee shop and look at Juxtapose magazine or Art News and just see what other artists are doing. And that's probably, and just seeing other artists succeed, I think. Well, quote unquote succeed, just what levels of success look like was really important to me, and trying to basically figure out where I could fit into that idea of, or what my idea of success was, I guess. And yeah, so other artists, I would say, has been the biggest influence on me. And going to art shows, as many as I can. That's why that you asked earlier, the quarantine, probably the biggest effect on me with the quarantine is not being able to go to art shows or galleries and see what people are doing firsthand. So that's probably the biggest influence is looking at other artists and seeing what they're doing.
Well, and Portland is such a wealth of galleries and museums, and it's such an incredible place to be as an artist. And
yeah, and even the coffee shops and restaurants always have great art, so you're not able to see that. So yeah, it's that'd probably be the biggest thing that I'm missing right now.
Yeah. Okay, so are there artists that influenced your work?
So it's twofold. I mean, there's artists from my past, like when I was in school, that influenced me early on. Like I loved Andy Warhol. Like I think a lot of, like, I love pop art. Like, so that's where a lot of the colors in my paintings come from, that my history and enjoying pop art and just having paintings that jump off the canvas. But then also like pre-pop art stuff, like Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, some of that stuff from like the late 50s, I really loved. Just the like you'll see, like with Rauschenberg, he did the kind of the drippy stuff, like the really textural application of paint, but juxtaposed with like realistic imagery and found objects. I just love that. He called them combines, and I just love that idea of combining everything that you have available to you into a piece to tell the story. So I've always loved his work. I have a few of his books in the studio, so he's been an influence of mine for a long time. And then more contemporary, I mean, he's not a young artist, but he's working today, is Kerry James Marshall. I learned about him probably in college, maybe a little bit after college. And for some reason, when I first learned about him, it didn't stick with me. But probably around 2010, 2011, I was reintroduced to him. And ever since then, I've just taken in as much of his work as I can, working with the figure. He works with the figure. He works with graphic elements, sometimes text. Like, just his approach to painting is a really big influence to me. And the approach, I think I mentioned it before, but just the idea of having something that you're interested in and letting that be the vehicle for building a body of work, and letting that kind of letting that be the start, and using your paintings or using your art as a way of investigating and finding out more about a topic that you're curious about. It seems like that's what he does, and I've been trying to impart that into my work to make it less about just making a good painting or making a pretty painting. I want to make sure that I'm feel a little bit smarter after I finish a body of work, or hopefully the viewer, after seeing one of my shows or seeing a piece of mine, leaves with a curiosity about what I was painting that makes them want to dig in a little bit deeper or know more. So he's currently probably the biggest influence on my day-to-day practice.
Yeah, I do feel like your later work too has a more richness to it, and you can really see that you're using your influences to kind of develop that, and I think that's really strong, what I've seen.
Yeah, I think I was in college. When I was in college, there was one teacher. He was a great teacher, but he told me once that after a while, you stop looking at other art and you just kind of lock yourself in the studio and make work. And at the time, I was like, oh, I guess that makes sense. But the further I get into my career, the more I realized that that was kind of crazy to think that you would not like look at another art or be influenced by people for your lifetime.
Right.
You'd be doing yourself a disservice, I think, to not see what current trends are, what people are doing, not to follow the trends, but just to stay abreast and stay fresh with your own work.
Yeah, well, and it's completely different today than it was when we were in school as well, right?
That's true. That's true.
So yeah, there's a lot more kind of available now.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Okay, so I'm going to stop this share. Okay, all right. Do you have any tips on drawing the figure?
Tips on drawing the figure. It's funny because like it all, like these days, it comes not when I say like it comes, it's like second nature. That sounds like I'm really good at drawing the figure, but like I think, like I said, knowing anatomy is really important, but also maybe forgetting a lot of that is really important too, and just like being loose and having fun, I think is kind of the main thing, because I think you can get really hung up on trying to make something perfect. So don't.
Yes.
Just know that like you're never there. There's a documentary that I watched called it might have been like Finding Hockney or something Hockney, and it was about this guy that was doing this tiny portrait of Marilyn Monroe, and he spent like years and years and years doing it, and he really wanted to show it to David Hockney for some reason. So he does it and like finally gets it into Hockney's hands, and David Hockney looks at it, and I can't remember what he said exactly, but he basically was just like, why did you spend all this time trying to perfect this thing? Because I mean, you look at like Hockney, David Hockney is another artist that I look at a lot, and you look at his portraits, and they're proportionate. Like the head is proportionate to the shoulders and everything, but they're not realistic. You know what I mean? They're his take on what a figure looks like. So getting the fundamentals down as much as you can, but then completely throwing that away. Maybe that might be going too far with it, but I think you know what I mean. Like,
yeah.
Just using the fundamentals that you have, but like turning it on its head a little bit. Is my advice.
Well, one of the things that I always tell my students is that there's a lot of students that say that they're a perfectionist and they have to make it perfect. And what I say is replace perfection with interesting. So how can you make it interesting versus perfect, and kind of focus on what you can do with that. So I think it's very similar to what you're saying now.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you for verifying a lot of what I say as a teacher through this.
Can I sort of make a comment on that also?
Sure.
It makes me think. It makes me think of just what you said earlier about Andy Warhol quote. About
dripping.
Yeah, how can you tell it's a paint? It's a painting. That's one thing I've always felt strongly about too. Is like photorealism has always been kind of like a boring art to me. It's like if you're going to do photorealism, then just take a picture,
Yeah.
So that's what it reminds me of, what you're just saying.
No, for sure. No, I think all art has its place, but there's definitely like a kind of you could labor over this thing to make it look just like a photo, but like why? It's the way I approach it. Yeah.
Oh, this is great. All right. Okay, so last question. Is there anything that you've done differently since the COVID-19 quarantine began?
With my art, I mean, art-wise, probably not. Because my studio, like it's not at my house, but it's like I'm just in a room, like pretty isolated from people. I just walk in the front door, then go directly into my room. So I'm able to get into the studio. I would say, I mean, my day-to-day, like outside of art, is probably the only thing that's like a little bit different. But no, not really. I mean, the interactions with people, not being able to go to galleries, like I said before, has been like the biggest issue. But I guess I've maybe, there's a couple galleries that I follow that have virtual gallery tours. So I've looked at some of those, which is pretty nice. There's no replacing going to galleries, but I probably searched for more on Instagram for more like gallery tours, just to see what shows look like versus just individual pieces of art. So that'd probably be the difference in like my art intake. But the art making is pretty much the same.
Yeah, I know it's interesting. You're able to see different museums too that you might never have been able to either attend, and so it's been in kind of an odd and kind of interesting way to be able to look at art today.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Jeremy? It'll be.
I have one.
Okay.
How do you manage to get your paints or your colors so blending so well? I'm just starting to paint and I'm having a lot of trouble figuring out how to get colors to look right.
Oh, like to get, you mean like if I'm using like a skin tone, trying to get the right skin tones, that kind of thing?
Yeah, like I see that you use, like you said, the pixelation almost, the blotches of color. How do you get all those colors to look like a skin tone?
A lot of trial and error, and like I've been doing it for so long that I kind of know what colors to pick and pull to achieve like a warm skin tone versus a cool skin tone. But I'm trying to think of how to explain like a good way of teaching that. I don't really know. I mean, it's like I have, looking at my colors, like I have for like a darker complexion, I have like raw umber and burnt umber are the two colors that I start with for darker skin. But also know to warm the skin, you might want to add, like I use, so look at my colors. I just grab them now. Like I don't even look at the colors. Like if you add like a cadmium red to raw umber, it warms it up, or like the ochres, like adding an ochre to raw umber kind of warms it up. But then if you want like a cooler look, the color that I really love using to cool down skin tones is Payne's Gray, which almost looks like it's called gray, but it's actually like a navy blue. I add that for darker skin, for Caucasian skin. That cools skin down a lot. But I would say a lot of it is just trial and error. And with the way I paint, leaving some of the air is beneficial for me. Like if you were to look closely, looking from afar, let's see if I can, like when you look at the face from afar, it kind of blends, I think. But then when you get close to it, you start to see all these different colors, and there might be like a purple that comes out of nowhere that sitting next to like a burnt umber makes all the difference between it sitting next to. I'm not explaining this very well, but it's not an easy thing to do, but I think it's just something that you have to like really dig into and investigate. Knowing color theory, I think, is pretty important. How to warm your colors without muddying them, I think, is really important. You just have to kind of play around with it a lot to figure out what works. Just that was a bad answer for your question.
No, that was great. Don't worry about it. Yeah, because it's a lot of trial and error, like you're saying, right? It's
Yeah.
like, so biggest thing too is mixing, right? So kind of mix a few things, kind of see what happens, and
Yeah, and I mean, a lot. Again, you could mix for days. Like you could mix on your palette for days. A lot of times I mix, and then I'll just put it on the painting to see what it looks like. And sometimes it might not look great, but then you do the next color next to it, and it kind of makes sense. I know, like for every painting that I do, there's like this 25% of the way, 30% of the way, it looks horrible. Like it looks terrible, and you just have to keep going. And especially with acrylic, you can paint over the mistakes or paint over the things and just build up. You just have to kind of leave those. For my work at least, I leave a lot of the mistakes. Either they get painted over or they sit next to something else that kind of makes them look less like a mistake. I don't know if
yeah. Well,
if that makes sense.
I call it the hating stage. You go through a part where you're not seeing it the way you want to, and then all of a sudden it starts to come together. And
Exactly.
yeah.
And sometimes that stage it sticks around longer than you want it to, and that's kind of when you know you have to abandon ship.
All right, so I have a student that wrote a question. I think he's kind of referring to how has living in a different environment, home, or state affected your art and your perception of art? So kind of, he might have watched your video where you're living in Portland, but you're not from Portland, and kind of, has that influenced you as an artist?
You know, I mean, I've been in Portland since 2007, so I've been here for a while. I know that when I first moved to Portland, like I came from North Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, which is a big city, but not necessarily a cultural, like creative cultural city. So moving to Portland was like super eye-opening for me. I visited in 2006 and just saw all the art in like coffee shops and just everywhere, murals everywhere. So moving to Portland was like the best thing I could have done for my career. And it just, I mean, it influenced me just being around. And again, I didn't go to like grad school. I just graduated and stuck around Charlotte for a few years. Coming to Portland to me, I don't know what grad school's like, I've never been, but coming to Portland to me felt like just being in a place where everybody kind of had the same passion for art, but also like at the same place, like with their careers. Like I think Rebecca and I were kind of in the same place when I met, and Michelle Raymond, was it Michelle that did one of these, or?
Oh, no, it was another friend, Michelle, but she'll hopefully come and do one.
Okay, there's another artist that we were in a studio together with, Michelle Raymond. We were all kind of like in the same place, so I was able to like see what they were doing, and I don't know, it moving to a new environment was 100% like great for me as an artist. And I was in a place in my life where I needed something new. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah, I felt like it was the perfect place for my 20s, and come building up what I was doing for sure. Yeah. Portland's great. Okay, so anyone else have questions? All right. So, well, thank you so much, Jeremy. Let's do a little round of applause. Thank you for being our speaker today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so, well, all right, look at, you're getting rounds of applause that way. Yeah, this online thing has been such a weird thing, so it's kind of how we're kind of moving forward with this right now. So, okay, so we will kind of share this video, and I'll kind of let you know when that's up as well. And this has been this has been great. So I can't wait to share it with other students here. So,
Cool. All right. Well, thank you, Rebecca.
okay. Well, good luck with everything. So
Thanks.
thank you.
See you guys later.
Have a good one.
Yeah, Darren.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.